So today I want to talk about an organisation from the Second World War known as the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. It was an organisation in the Second World War set up by the British government to basically run and control acts of sabotage, agents in the field, and try and encourage resistance in occupied countries against Germany. Originally, SOE was invented by combining two already existing organisations. One was MIR, which was run by General Colin Gubbins before the war, and he was looking into guerrilla warfare as a new form of warfare. He'd fought with Russian partisans at the end of the First World War, and he'd fought in Northern Ireland against the IRA, and he saw how effective a guerrilla force could be against well-trained militaries with basically no funding and no tactics. They just were doing their own thing, and he realised it was quite effective. He was in charge of MIR, and it was combined with another section called Section D, which were mainly doing things like propaganda and economic warfare and affecting kind of the economy of the war effort and making it harder for the war to be ran behind the scenes. And these were combined at the beginning of the war by Neville Chamberlain, not Winston Churchill. Everyone always goes, Churchill created them to set Europe ablaze. He had nothing to do with them. He was barely involved. Chamberlain invented them at the beginning of the Second World War, and it's because we were losing massively. We were losing massively at the beginning of the war. We went over to France to try and help, but all we did was sit with the French at the border and just kind of wait for Germany to show up. And when they showed up with tanks, machine guns, an entire new tactic of war called Blitzkrieg, we got our asses kicked and we got pushed into the sea. And we managed to escape, but we had no way of conducting a proper war against Germany. We were defeated. France was taken. It was terrible. But SOE and its former versions of it had already been in Europe trying to set up spy networks. Gubbins had already been in Poland before that fell, and he'd set up tons of spy rings, which sadly were all found before we could have any use out of them. The Germans got rid of them very quickly, but the concept was there. Gubbins proved you could set up successful spy networks and have them be at least partially connected. It's just that the Germans showed up and took them all out. So that was already happening, and we realised that we needed some way to get back into mainland Europe. So even if we couldn't mount an invasion, we wanted to be getting information, knowing what was going on over there, trying to rally the people to fight for their own countries. France was asking us to do everything they could because we were their allies. De Gaulle had escaped and asked us to try and get his family out. In the end, he arranged their own escape, but he was asking our secret services to try and get his family out, and he wanted us to find ways to get agents of his Free French army back into France. And we thought that was quite a good idea too. So when we had already got this baby spy network, we decided we'll try and get agents into as many countries as we can. And from that point on, SOE kind of was winging it. They were making it up as they went along. No one knew what the other teams were doing. It was very, it was very casual, very do what you like. If it works, then well done. We had the French section, who's given to Maurice Buckmaster. He set up the networks in France, and he was given an office and no staff and told to get to work. And that's where most of our famous spy stories come from, was F section. We had people like Vera Atkins, who was his secretary, who worked with him, and she was running most of the female agents, but she herself was heavily involved. We have Virginia Hall, the American journalist, who was also a wireless operator and a network. She ran networks in France for us. Went on to work in the CIA. That came from F section. All the famous ones are mainly from F section, but every country had their own section. Holland had one, Denmark had one, Norway had one. Any country that would let us get agents in or let us supply them with weapons or give us information, they were helping us. SOE was not well equipped at all. No one wanted to help them. They weren't being given tons of weapons and arms, at least not at first. They started gaining favour with other agencies and other members of the British Army, and even the Americans started helping towards the end because after a while they realised they were getting results, but at first it was completely thrown together. Nothing was really going well or successfully, so they were kind of making it up as they went along. They wanted boats to be able to get people to France, especially, but the Navy wanted nothing to do with them. gave them the odd boat, but the rest they stole or commandeered or requisitioned from people fleeing Europe. They would take these boats, refit them with armor, specialized engines, machine guns, but at the same time disguised as fishing boats and send them back and see what they could find out and see if they could drop agents in mainland Europe. The RAF were a little bit more helpful. They did give them some planes and they were willing to fly missions for them, but they were still very cautious of what were basically considered the new guys who seemed to be just kind of stepping on people's toes. MI6 and SIS, which was the Secret Intelligence Service, really did not like them. They thought that they were terrible and were going to ruin their operations and did everything they could to close them down, even to the point of going to Anthony Eden and basically saying, look, you need to look into SOE and get rid of them because they're just causing trouble. When in reality, it was a little bit of the fact that they were the new guys and making things harder. But in reality, it was also the fact that they were doing things that no one else was doing. So they were getting a lot more attention, and it was a bit of jealousy on SIS's part. But they were doing everything they could to shut them down. But as SOE was allowed to carry on, more by the skin of its teeth than history likes to remember, they started getting results and started doing things that no one thought was possible. And in the end, D-Day was a major success, mainly because of the information that SOE had been gathering, had been sending back, the amount of arms that they had been able to have dropped to them and stored away for the French resistance. They were building private armies with multiple groups of French resistance, including communists, which was they were considered everyone's enemy. No one liked the communists, but we were working with the communists, we were working with the Free French. Anyone who was willing to fight you could come and help SOE. They did not discriminate. On the subject of discrimination, they also were the first people to actively encourage women in combat roles and frontline roles, especially F section. They realised that women were useful in more ways than just being a driver, which was what they were usually limited to, drivers and secretaries. They realised that they could break codes incredibly well. They were a lot more intelligent than some people might have wanted to give them credit for. They could work out codes, break codes, transmit them. They were very good wireless operators. And SOE, especially F section with Buckmaster, thought that they could be sneakier than men. They could be more subtle than men because they'd had a lot of male agents go in thinking they were going to save the world and ended up walking straight into the hands of the Germans. So now you had women who were willing to do the same job and they were just as brave, just as capable, and Buckmaster and Gubbins, by extension, realised that this was worth a go. Like everything with SOE, it was worth a go, and it paid off. Some of the greatest stories of heroism come from these women who were behind the lines doing exactly the same job as men, who might be considered unsung heroes. But I think there's quite a lot in SOE circles that understands women played a very large role. As for making it up as they went along and their supply problem, they also invented a lot of things because they had resources, but none that were readily usable. They had to figure out what they could make. They made different types of explosives and figured out that they had to not just you couldn't just carry a bomb around with you. It had to be concealed. It had to be hidden. So they made things that were looked like James Bond gadgets. They invented the pistol that was a pen. It looked like a pen, but it had a single round in it for emergencies. You could shoot someone and get away. It wasn't really issued in large numbers, but they invented it. Classic James Bond gadget. Itching powder, known by kids as a prank toy, was invented by SOE to make the Germans uncomfortable. It was anything they could do to make life for the Germans just difficult. They invented engine oil that actually had sand in it, would gum up engines, but make it look like there was nothing wrong with it. It'd take a while to figure out that it was that, and you'd have to change the entire engine. They'd made rats stuffed with explosives that used to be shoveled into the engines of trains and furnaces and factories. And just for a way of SOE's psychological warfare with those rats, the Germans had reported a few factories being blown up and not quite understanding why the furnaces had blown up. And it was more than likely these rats. The French resistance claimed it was they'd used a rat bomb. But more impressively was the Germans shot down a plane that was full of rat bombs and suddenly thought, oh my God, the British are creating bombs that look like rats and they're going to blow everything up with rats. So every time we're shoveling coal, we need to get rid of any rat because it could be a bomb. The reason there was a plane full of them is because we were getting rid of them. We didn't think they were useful enough, so we were going to send them somewhere to get rid of them or take the explosives out. They weren't going to be used as rat bombs, but the Germans were now convinced that we were, which took up man hours. It made them check everything. It slowed them down, slowed production down, and made them scared. Behind the lines, they now thought they were going to get blown up by a dead rat. This is the kind of thing SOE were for. It was subversion, clandestine work, and it was completely just made up as they went along. And they changed the course of the war at many points. And the point of my videos at the moment is I'd like to try and share some of the randomness, some of the stories, the people that were involved, try and get their stories out, just because I find it interesting and I feel like there's not a lot of information out there on YouTube at least of people talking about this, and it's a good excuse to get some information out there of some weird stories of not that far in the past. This happened recently, and I just think it's good to try and get history out there best we can, especially the more unknown stuff. Everyone knows about D-Day, but no one will know about SOE's role in the lead up to the actual execution of the plan, and then the weeks and months after D-Day, and everything that they did, and the people, these incredible people that were part of SOE and carried out these missions. And the most important thing about these agents is they were all volunteers. They were civilians, most of them, who'd gone into it in some way, felt they wanted to do their part, or they were in other branches of the military and were almost bored of their role, feeling they weren't doing enough, that was actually making a difference in the war effort. But they were all volunteers. They could all say, no, I'm not going at any time. They could drop out of training. They could say no on the runway if they were about to be taken to France. And there would be no problems with that. Everyone understood this is volunteer work, and we understand it is a huge risk. Wireless operators were told that they had roughly 2 to 6 weeks life expectancy, and they were told that up front. They were very honest because they understood these are civilians or these are volunteers who are willing to risk their lives for us in what was essentially a massive experiment that just happened to work. They were incredible people, and I just feel that more needs to be known about them. And I'd like to make more videos about more specific things, like I say, if there's any interest. If there isn't, I'll still probably make them. Uh, Hopefully, stick around, watch a couple of videos. You might learn something.